Hello, everyone. Welcome to the weekly H panel. After a number of weeks of recess, we are back. The H panel starts now. Today, we'll be covering the ramifications of the Somaliland, Ethiopia port deal, and I'm joined by Faisal Kobler, Skel Gelgesa, and Alamayo Aldemariam. I think there was an echo, so it's from Alamayo, I guess. So I will mute everyone except those who are speaking. So we'll start with the usual first segment. And the first segment for each panel is to talk about what is the highlight for each of the panelists. Faisal, what would the highlight for you?
Well, I think the highlight for me was the uh, the kind of explanations that the Ethiopian government tried to give regarding the MOU, particularly at the conference that Addis Ababa held for the ambassadors and its missions, which is still going through. And I think Ridwan Hussein came on the record close to saying that Ethiopia's intent. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, Ethiopia's intent was shared with major powers. And then once they threw that information out, they went out and told several key people, newsmakers and opinion makers in Addis Ababa that they briefed governments like the USA. So I tweeted that this morning and directly contacted the US State Department to seek solution and explanation as to how much the U.S. Department knew about this, who knew, what embassy the Ethiopian government briefed as far as the United States is concerned as a U.S. Citizen. And basically, I was told that, again, actually, that's the word is they used. This is the typical Addis Ababa spin. There is no information as far as the U.S. government is concerned where any U.S. officer was briefed about this issue. The U.S. government, A, does not support any violation of the territorial integrity of Somalia, and B, the U.S. government stands with Somalia to ensure it is Somalia's again sovereignty, and 3, the U.S. government underscores and really recognizes the progress that the Somali government and this administration in particular achieved within the last few years, and particularly the last 2 years, and therefore it's the official U.S. Policy to reject Ethiopia's claim, if any, and B, standards with Somalia. That is what I was given as an official stand of the United States of America. So where Redwan got, who they briefed, unless it's Russia, it's not China, because China already made its position known vis-a-vis this issue, where it stands again with Somalia. England, another major power, also made its stand to be known. So the only two people that are in the shade at this point in time as to Ridwan Hussein's issue is basically the United Arab Emirates, which we all know its role in Ethiopia at this point in time, and possibly Russia, which I'm not sure if Russia made its position clear on this issue. So I think that gives Somalia the options of ensuring that U.S. stands with her on this issue, and 2, to make sure that China is also in line as it has already expressed. So I think the ball is in the court of Addis Ababa to explain where they got this from, who they briefed, and what power they're talking about, unless it's Russia. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal, for that. Welcome again, Skel. What about you? What stood out for you?
Well, really nothing stands out these days. For one, it's the port issue, the acquisition of the port by Ethiopia in an intelligent, unusual manner. That they succeeded in Ethiopia's quest in accessing the sea in an unexpected way. And I would have liked to simply continue to say that there is nothing that stood out except the stories of doom and gloom, of war, of famine, of depredations, of want. That's the story around the country. But because Faisal raised it, I just wanted to comment on what Mr. Redwan said. He did not quite say that everybody knew because they have informed them. What he said was the major powers, international organizations, and NGOs that pass for a think tank, he said they knew all along. They knew all along we were in quest in our quest with to obtain the Red Sea. That they knew. That's what he said. How did they know? Because they announced it. They say they needed a port. So it was really public knowledge. What he was saying was really public knowledge. Because the Prime Minister of Ethiopia had time and again declared that Ethiopia needs a port for existential reasons. So basically, what he was saying was everybody knew that we were in need of port and that we were trying to get access to the sea. But what they didn't know, and this is the key issue that should be paid attention to, that is what they did not know was where we were going to get that port. Whereas everybody expected us in the Red Sea or Assab, we showed up somewhere else to this. And that, he said, was the surprise. So, it's the Ethiopian way of double speak. Even in that speak, if you scrutinize it. But I just wanted to comment on that. But my issue today, what stood out for me, is not about the port. We'll get back to that. We'll have ample time for that. But what I was reminded of what was going on in Ethiopia, that I was reminded of about 2 years ago. And 2 years ago, I wrote an extended piece, an editorial for Addis Standard, in which I argued, following Antonio Gramsci, that morbid symptoms appear in an era of interregnum. And I pointed out that those morbid systems were appearing in Ethiopia. No need to name what those morbid systems are at this point. But those morbid systems actually appear in times of an interregnum, where a country or an entity descends into chaos, into a crisis that emerge when the old is not dead yet and the new cannot be born. It's in that interregnum, in the between and the betwixt, in that era of normlessness and anomie, that morbid systems of a difficulty, of crisis emerge. At that time, many people did not understand. Many people who were engulfed by the euphoria of the talk of change in Ethiopia, many people who actually believed that democratization was going to happen in Ethiopia, did not want to see what I was writing about, and they did not want to believe, even if they were able to look at and understand. It was a time that you deny reality, but at that time was difficult to accept it in the area where everybody was gripped by the euphoria for change or hope for change. What I saw this week and last week is that the reality and the depth of the complexity of the problem is now appearing to ordinary people. Ordinary people are able to see, if you follow the news from all over the country, and the people that visit Ethiopia and come back and report today actually tell you that there is an understanding. Some people sense it, and some people reach the conclusion after analyzing facts and figures. Either way, people see nothing but stalemate and stagnation. People see nothing but a feeling of despair and dysphoria because there is no light at the end of the tunnel. There is no way out of the conundrum that the country finds itself in. The reason that I say this is yesterday, the Prosperity Party officials were in Wanchi. They descended on Wanchi to inaugurate a resort and showcase it as an achievement of a millennia in Ethiopian history. It was probably the third or the fourth resort, one from each regions. In Lake Tana area, in the southern area, the prime minister had made this his project, a showcase for his ability to design projects and implement projects to successful completion. There, the Oromia president, the president of Oromia, made a triumphant speech in which he said in Amharic, the philosophy that tied us to poverty has been defeated. The philosophy of Meddemer, which is essentially the roadmap to prosperity, has changed despair to hope, darkness into a dazzling daylight. Amazing work is being done. Our Prime Minister's vision is elevating Ethiopia onto a pedestal of prosperity and endless possibilities. 20 kilometers away from that site, a convoy of 4 transport vehicles, public transport vehicles, were attacked. One person was killed, many were wounded, and many thanked Allah or God because they escaped alive. That is only 20 kilometers away from that site. But if you look around the country everywhere, it is apocalypse now. I don't have to go and name it. That's what's going on in the country. So what did that remind me? The first time I was reminded of the interregnum. This one reminded me of the tale of two cities. The tale of two cities where you have darkness and light at the same time. It's just the tale of two cities. It's the best of times and it's the worst of times. It's the age of wisdom and it's the age of foolishness. It was the season of light and it was the season of darkness. It was a spring of hope and it's winter of despair. That's what I was reminded. That's what stood out for me.
Getachew, can I go back to that issue with Ridwan Hussein? Actually, I would even go further to say that they have shared this information with some of their connections and news media makers in Addis Ababa prior to even Ridwan coming to the podium, that they have sat down with major powers and they told the major powers about the MOU. Not to mention the fact that all along before even this incident where Ridwan and the Addis Ababa team came and said the international powers are aware of, they played several prior scenarios where they even went as far as saying President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud was informed and he knew all along. So this is an entire litany of falsification and campaign and changing the story. So I think the Ethiopian government, yes, and even some of the people who are commenting try to say, this is not new. So I think, I will stand by the fact that Addis Ababa said they shared the information with major powers, intent being the US and Great Britain. And I think in the coming 2 to 3 days, we will see them walking back on that. And I think a couple of other media reported the reflection on what Ridwan Hussein said, which was that they shared this information with major powers. And yes, the intent previously was the Red Sea, Eritrea, and now they said our situation was with Somalia. Thank you. I just want to put that on the record.
Okay, great. Thank you, Faisal. Thank you, Sgal. Alex, welcome again. I think this is your second or third time on the H panel. What is your take in terms of the first segment, the highlight for you, and we'll go into the main topic after you.
Thank you, Getachew. Thank you for inviting me to join this extraordinary panel of Horn of Africa watchers. Okay, so if anything stood out for me this past week, or these past 2 weeks, nothing can as beautifully describes it as the opening paragraph of Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities that Professor Eskel Gabisa just recited. Actually, such was the case since the coming to power of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed since April 2018. It was the best of times, and it was the worst of times. So I have been following the news of the signing of the MOU between Ethiopia and Somaliland since New Year's Day. And what stood out for me was how Ethiopia was trying to manage the diplomatic fallout since the second day, when it realized that what it did was unimaginable, was something unthinkable, has never been done, and won't be thought to be done in decades to come. So Ethiopia is still trying to manage that crisis, that diplomatic crisis. So as you saw, on the second day, they convened a meeting of the Addis-based foreign diplomats to give them a briefing on what it meant, on what the MOU meant, and the like. Then they went on to opening an exhibition on the history of Ethiopia's diplomacy, what a successful history of diplomacy that Ethiopia had. No doubt Ethiopia had stellar diplomats in the past before the coming to power of this person. So yeah, that's what stood out to me was really how Ethiopia can be used to do somebody else's bidding. Yeah, that was that.
Okay, thank you, Adamayo. We will come into the details of that. There is a lot of interest in this show today. We are getting bombarded by a number of people, even hacking their way into the studio. Let's get started, Faisal. You are very busy on Twitter in terms of responding and reflecting and confirming a number of issues. So this is how it all started on the New Year of 2024 in Addis, and there was as well before that what happened in Djibouti. Maybe for those who are hearing this for the first time, Faisal, if you were to give a short, brief history in terms of the timeline, what unfolded in different parts of the capitals of the Horn of Africa?
Yes, thank you very much. So for the last few years, I would say 5 years, the Somali elite during Mohamed Abdullahi Farmacho as well as President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud were really prepared from an honest point of view for regional integration. The World Bank, IMF, everybody, USAID, US government were pushing. And through the years, Somalis have been moving away from their anti-Ethiopian stand to more collaboration and coexistence. That was true with the Mullah series, although 2006, the EPRDF government invaded Somalia with the insistence of the US government. But after that, bridges were again, rebuilt, and the two started having some cooperation around Al-Shabaab issues, what have you. In the last 5 years, conferences that we have been holding in Djibouti even invited President Mustafa Umar and the entire leadership of the Somali region to also, avail them to the thinking that Somalis were developing, which is more of a collaboration and coordination and regional integration. With that, we heard that Mohamed Abdullahi Farmacho tentatively had discussion with Prime Minister Abiy as far back as 2019 to say, yes, we are ready, that Ethiopia can use the ports. Nothing was signed, no particular port were mentioned, but they discussed the cafes about potentially for available ports that Somalia can help develop. In addition to the Berbera, which was, by the way, signed and okayed by Hassan Sheikh Mohamud when he was president the first time, not this time, 2012. because there was this accommodation of Somaliland, as long as it's economics, NGO, human, capacity development, not to stop while the discussion about the secession was going on. So the tripartite agreement that we have seen with Ethiopia, United Arab Emirates, and Somaliland was okayed by the federal government of Somalia. Having said that, the Djibouti conference comes. This was the most productive conference that Somalia and Somaliland had, to the point where they even talked about modalities of coming back, confederation, loose federation, what have you. That's where, when teams of Abiy started to really throw their bomb, the nuclear option, and try to sabotage. I was informed that Hassan Sheikh Mohamud had talked to Abiy Ahmed 3 times. The first time Abiy approached, hold his hand casually as Abiy does, and say, when am I going to have my 4 ports? And President Hassan was startled, and they just kind of passed that as a joke. The second time, again, Prime Minister Abiy raised the question. This time, Hassan took it serious. The third time was in Jeddah, when they had a very heated, spirited discussion. And basically, President Hassan told Abiy, if you want to use Somalia sports, let's do in the open, transparent, give us your proposal. Let's take that to the cabinet and to the parliament. That's when Abiy get angry, walked away from that meeting, and they haven't talked since. So this MOU was cooked quickly. When it was announced, I was sitting with the foreign minister of Somalia in Nairobi, who just returned from Djibouti and had no idea, except when Musa Bihi was walking out of that meeting. He said he was going to Ethiopia and he had some engagement with Abiy Ahmed. When they heard the MOU, President Hassan Guled picked up the phone and called Musa Bihi 3 times. He did not pick up the phone. That's where things fall apart. From that point on, there has not been any communication between Somalia and Ethiopia. Abiy, Prime Minister Abiy called Hassan Sheikh Mohamud about 7 times, and there was nobody to pick up the phone. That's where conditions are. That's where situations are. So the takeaway is, yes, Somalia was ready for regional integration. There was mental preparation by the Somali elite to really work with Ethiopia. But as I wrote that article I shared with you in 2019, I was one of the lone voices that were saying Ethiopia is not ready for regional integration. Its history is not capable to accommodate regional history at this point in time, regional integration. Ethiopia in Abiy will use and weaponize the population that it has. And I was saying Somalis, watch out. Be aware of what Abiy can do. I'm writing this in 2019, knowing the paradoxes with which Ethiopians think, the imperial government of Ethiopia and its chemistry. And lo and behold, Abiy is using and weaponizing the population that he has, not only with Somalia, he used that with Tigray, and he may use that. And the driving force for Abiy to say, I want a port, it's not economics, it's not anything, it's population. And that's what I wrote in 2019. And it's unfortunate Ethiopia to be the spoiler of the region's stability and integration. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal. Skill on January 1st that happened, and we didn't actually know from what the government was saying, including its state media, in terms of the details. There was a breaking news everywhere. Now we have the Red Sea, and then maybe within a couple of days, even to change the location, everything. But the same day, we heard from Somali TV that what the president of Somaliland said. We allowed Ethiopia 20 kilometers of sea, and Ethiopia will be the first country to recognize Somaliland according to the memorandum of understanding. That is President Bihi saying. So how do you characterize how this unfolded within the Ethiopian media landscape with the populace and so on versus what happened? I'm saying this for our viewers because Professor Scale, 6 days later, he wrote this calculated ambiguity as a sovereign port access to the sea or a naval base. Scale?
Yeah, I just want to make a general point about what Ethiopian government, media, and known personalities and um, um, associated sources say. It really behooves us to scrutinize what they say carefully because you cannot pin them down to their own words. And earlier, when I spoke about Redouane, that's the point I wanted to make. They don't mean what they say, and they don't say what they mean. They use the Amharic language, known for its wax and gold. They use it in a very sophisticated way to deceive people. That's why I say the double speak. What happened, even as Redwan Hussein was trying to damage control about what they had done by announcing the MOU, which, by the way, the MOU we don't know anything about because we haven't seen it. We haven't seen it. It's only based, what we're discussing is based on statements that they make. So what I heard Mr. Hussein say in that clarification, was supposed to be clarification of the position of the Ethiopian government after the brouhaha and the fallout after the MOU, trying to damage control. What he said was in the Amharic language, and I listened very carefully, says that the major powers in the world knew that we were looking for a port, that we had a policy, an intention to obtain a port for Ethiopia. He said that interstate or international organizations knew about what we intended, what we were trying to do, because we informed them. Think tanks were studying about our quest for access to the sea because we talked about it. But he said, he qualified that, he said that what they didn't know, what they didn't know is not that we were seeking access to the sea or obtaining a port for Ethiopia. That's not what they did not know. What they did not know was where we were going to go seeking that port. We surprised them. Keep in mind, even the prime minister issued a statement in which he said, I am like Jesus Christ. I appear where people did not expect me. Where everybody was expecting us to obtain a port or access to the sea in Assab, we found it somewhere else. That is the distinction of what Mr. Redouane is saying. But keep in mind, they speak using the wax and gold to try to continue to deceive. Don't take the word as it is. Scrutinize is what I was saying. Now, what did they say? What is that they announced about Ethiopia's quest of access to the sea? It was not about Somaliland. It was not about any other port. When the Somalis protested, because they remonstrated what the Ethiopians were saying when the prime minister himself announced that Ethiopia henceforth will seek a port for Ethiopia, the Somalis were jittery. And he sent Ahmed Shide and say, that doesn't apply to you. Our quest for the ports doesn't apply to reassure the Somali government. I think Faisal raised about the issue of the meeting in Jeddah where the Prime Minister and Hassan Sheikh Mohamud met. The gist of what the Ethiopian government is saying, regardless of what happened, what they're saying is that we informed you. We informed you that we are in need of a port. But look what they're saying. What they're saying is that we deceived everybody. Everybody was talking about the port in Assab and the Red Sea. But we found it here. Look how smart we are, is the gist of the exchange. This is not how governments act. Governments actually issue statements written so that there is no ambiguity in what they say. But they use ambiguity. They use ambiguity to push on an unpopular policy. And that is the point that I was making in that article. It's a calculated ambiguity. Don't fall for that ambiguity. What did they say in the MOU or what was signed and the statements that they have made since or right afterwards? What they said was Ethiopia obtained a port. Well, the MOU, we don't know about it. What they said is Ethiopia, in Amharic, you can translate it, Ethiopia obtained a port. Number two, Ethiopia gained access to the sea. Number three, we founded a navy, and now we have waters for our navy to sail on. Three things. We can't we cannot make sure what is true and what is false because the MOU is not in public. So they used that ambiguity between obtaining a port, access to the sea, and a naval base. Now, in the 2 weeks since it was signed, they have walked back all kinds of things. They have all walked back on all kinds of things. Now, the last statement the Ethiopian government issued was that what they are talking about is leasing a land to situate the navy. That's all they say. That's what they're going to do. In exchange for what? What they said they promised, and I'm careful with it. What they said they promised the Somaliland government or Musabihi that they would extend recognition to them. They walked back that. They walked back. They said, we will give you recognition the minute that we obtain the land. Well, the Somaliland officials are saying, no, we're going to get the recognition and then we'll give you land. So the ambiguity is there. So what I wrote in that there is that they lie, a big lie. They did not obtain a port. They did not obtain access to the sea because Ethiopia never lost access to the sea, never, even in the last 30 years. And the last one, the major issue that they're talking about is the Navy. Well, what kind of Navy? What kind of Navy is going to be situated in a land, in a Somaliland, where taking land, Ethiopia taking land away from the Somalis is a death knell? That's how it sounds. Somalia forever was seeking land that was lost to Ethiopia. Well, rightly so, because it was ceded by the British in 1954. But to give land to Ethiopia in exchange for recognition, even the Isaac elders, the elders from Isaac, the same clan that Musabihi also hails from, they said, go sell your own camels, not land. Our land is not for sale. And this is across Somaliland, in Hargeisa itself. So the point that I was trying to make earlier is that what they are saying they don't mean, and what they say they don't mean, or what they mean they don't say, that is what it is. They're trying to use words, wax and gold, to confuse and deceive people, is what I was saying, not contradicting at all what you're saying, Faisal.
Thank you, Skell, for that. I hope your connection is well now, Alex. So yesterday you published this article, I believe, on the conversation. Let me just pull that. So Ethiopia still with Somaliland upends regional dynamics, risking strife across the Horn of Africa. So again, people are still struggling to understand what it is, as mentioned by Isgail and Faisal, but also what the ramifications are. So what is your reading based on also what is included in your article in terms of who is saying what, from Asmara to Djibouti to Hargeisa, Mogadishu, you name it, even within Ethiopia, from Bahar Dar to Maqala, etc. Alamayo?
Thank you, Getachew. Okay, so I have been speaking about this since day one, since the signing of the MOU, and I was on Voice of America Amharic, Voice of America Tigrinya, and finally on the Conversation US. The editing took a longer process, and everything I wanted to say isn't published. Actually, it was prey to the editors, fell prey to the editors. The process. So let me say the things really that I want to say, but that I wasn't able to say because they were cut out. First, as you know, this wasn't the first MOU that Ethiopia signed with Somaliland. The first was in 2018. And that was soon after the United Arab Emirates ran DP World, lost its concession because Djibouti decided to unilaterally nationalize its concession in Djibouti. DP World in February 2018. Then, right after this cancellation, this happened in February. In March, DP World offered Ethiopia 19% of its share in Berbera, while DP kept 51%. It gave Ethiopia 19% and Somaliland 30%. And we don't know what happened in between. We don't know what happened. DP has lost its concession in Djibouti. This is a thing we know for a fact. And the United Arab Emirates had also, not only it was using the Durale container port, but it also had a military base in Djibouti. And as you know, Ethiopia doesn't have a navy. I mean, Abiy dreams, you know, if that's the right word. But it's like a nightmare. It's like more like a nightmare than a dream. Ethiopia doesn't have a navy. We all know this. What is being reported, what he's trying to push is that he has been training some officers offshore somewhere, maybe in the United Arab Emirates, and that he has some cadets, some new graduate cadets that he wants to place in the newly acquired naval base in Somaliland. But what we know for a fact is that both the United States and the United Arab Emirates are working very hard to establish themselves in Berbera. For instance, the United States has passed a bill, the Somaliland Security Pact, it's called, which for the first time made Somaliland beneficiary of the Department of Defense's whopping more than $800 billion, a share in that money for developing this security cooperation between the United States and Somaliland. As you know, since the Israeli-Palestinian war has started, the maritime route, the corridor, the Red Sea corridor, has come to the limelight. It's one of the most important developments that's being observed today. So the United States is trying to acquire that, and the United States official position towards Somalia hasn't changed. The United States official position towards Somaliland hasn't changed. But what we witness today is former United States diplomats, high-level diplomats, ambassadors, including those who served as Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, people like Tibor Nagy, Ambassador Dr. Peter Pham. They just spend too much time on Twitter, like any of us, trying to influence United States position towards Somalia and Somaliland that the United States should recognize. So this raises the question: is Abiy doing the United Arab Emirates and the United States bidding, or is he really, as it's common in international relations, trying to pursue Ethiopia's national interest? Which I doubt.
Okay, great. Maybe I want to follow up on that question of how the region, how domestic entities are also responding to this, Faisal. Can you speak to immediately? I think we saw Cairo calling Asmara, all these visits to Asmara, to Mogadishu, and so on. So even within Hargeisa, how are you reading all these reactions within Ethiopia and in the region at large, including IGAD? There was a reaction to IGAD's statement by the Somalia Foreign Ministry. Faisal?
Yeah. No, I think Alamayo did a good context of this issue, except I will just again one more emphasize that all the previous deals that Alamayo mentioned were in accordance with the agreement of the Somali federal government. It's not only Berbera. United Arab Emirates has two bases in Puntland. It has a base in Jubaland, and there are two bases inside or on the outskirts of Mogadishu. So as I said, there was this agreement until Somaliland's issue is resolved, the federal government not to squeeze, hard on Somaliland, especially when it comes to economic development. And I think you also mentioned the military fund, which I was aware of from this inception. And at the end of the final of the report, the US government consulted with the federal government of Somalia and said that any exercise, any military, show to be done and the Red Sea would be in accordance with the federal government of Somalia's rules and regulations. So there is this, sort of like, accommodation that's built into the federal government of Somalia until this time. And I will mention that with the people of the ambassador is Peter Fan, and I think they are more of a chatter than policy influencers because they are so much mixed up with the local that they no longer behave. Actually, they cheapened, and I wrote that they cheapened the status of the so-called American diplomats. We used to have such a glorified picture of what an American diplomat is, and when you see these three people, you feel like, oh, some of them can be even car salesmen. So I totally agree with you. But I think the issue that Getachew raised, I am impressed by the number of countries and international bilateral organizations that lined up with Somalia, from the IGAD, AU, United Nations groups, Arab League, Islamic Conference, which would hold its virtual meeting on this issue on the 17th of this month, January, as an emergency kind of conference, and all other major countries. Somebody can question and split their language. Is it soft? Is this, that? But most of the texts that this country is released are really what Alamai was saying. They speak to the maintenance and assurance of Somalia's territorial integrity and sovereignty. You have England, USA, Egypt, all the Belgium. I mean, we can go down the line. In 2 weeks, Somalia has done great homework, as opposed to what Eskiel, my friend, told me on a private conversation, where Ethiopia's ambassadors and missions are drinking coffee at Addis Ababa. This is the time, if they were serious, this is the time embassies would be open and lobbying. But here they are busy with the Dorowat, and I think I don't think we should focus, and I think Scale did an excellent job in terms of the gimmicks of what the MOU is. I think the big picture is the ramification. Here is one of the founding fathers of the OAU and now AU, a founding member of IGAD. By the way, Somalia and Ethiopia were really the cornerstone of the IGAD groupings. You have Ethiopia that had stood forever the so-called territorial integrity principle of the African Union, and it is becoming a major country as we speak today to really work on that. I mean, the argument that always throws Somaliland into the mix, in my opinion, is a disservice both to the AU's principle of territorial integrity as well as to this issue. The Somaliland issue is just a spoiler. The big picture is Ethiopia trumping the sovereign rights of a neighboring country, and the ramifications could be this. What prevents Somalia to open its doors to a new version of TPLF, Ogaden National Liberation Front, OLA, Sidama Liberation Front, Afar Liberation Front? If any country is fragile, No country is as fragile as Ethiopia is, given the nationalities that it has, given the feudal imperial culture that it has, given the fact that the Somali region was incorporated violently in a conquest form into Ethiopia as in 1954, which is just around the corner. It's like a child playing with fire. That's why I said Somalis, particularly President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, was the one who broke the ice during the EPRDF time, who flew from Mogadishu and came to Jigjiga in defiance of his people's position, as much as Sadat did in the Israeli Arab relationship, and took a lot of heat by coming to Jijjiga. But what was his position at the time? His position was let the Somalis in Ethiopia sort their issues out. But we in the Somali Democratic Republic would like to recognize that these people are our brothers. We have to live with them in a peaceful. And here comes a child play in the hands of people like Mr. Abiy and Ridwan Hussein, and they destroy sort of for the last 40 years. The other day I tweeted the first time Ethiopians, Eritreans, and Somalis started good conversation was in the early 1990s, the Horn of Africa group in New York, where intellectuals and scholars will come together once a year and just sort out issues, moving away from the animist position that they used to have to a more cooperation and collaboration. That's what happens when you have a juvenile rulerism and a sort of idealistic messianic ruler that you have now in Ethiopia. So I think it's in the interest of Ethiopia not to concentrate on the MOU, but to concentrate on what Ethiopia is doing on the principles of territorial integrity of Somalia and the fact that it's breaking rules and regulations respected throughout the world at different levels. And with that, I think it's up to the Ethiopian people to make the choice. They want to go to war with Somalia, which is ready at this point in time, or they want to force Abiy and his team to roll back the so-called MOU, which is meaningless, as Iskandar said, really has no content, not satisfying even the Somaliland secessionists, because they have nothing today to take to their house, to their home. There is nothing in the hands of Somaliland to say we got recognition. And even if they got the recognition, where is that going to take them? Because still Somalia will occupy the seat and it will take some measures. So I think it's a choice Ethiopians need to make, and I hope they make the right choice. But the point should be why Ethiopia is trumping the AU's rules and regulations. Why is it violating international rule? And who is going to support except United Arab Emirates? Where does the US stand, who gives Ethiopia a budget makeup to the tune of 60% of its budget? I think we would like to pressure the United States government to do some actions so that Ethiopia doesn't stay on the course of violating rules and regulations, including the huge human right violation it did in Tigray, Oromia, and Amhara region.
Okay, thank you, Faisal. Iskandar, one question from our viewer is who is saying Ethiopia cannot continue to spend billions, and we should understand the consequence of a landlocked Ethiopia. What did you expect? This is a question from a viewer. But you were mentioning about how the government is saying you were expecting us in Assab. Here we go. We surprised you in Somaliland. But there are people who say, no, this MOU is a distraction. Maybe the real move in terms of military move and everything else would be still in Eritrea by Abiy Ahmed. So what do you say to that kind of reading? The other aspect of this is as well from Daniel Kibra to Redwan Hussein. They are saying the world was against that when we did GERD, the Grand Renaissance Dam, and they are saying, but we did it. So now, no matter how people are reacting, we will also do this. Your reaction to that scale?
All right. Two questions. The first one is consider the consequences of Ethiopia remaining a landlocked country. Well, that idea of landlocked itself probably needs a definition here, but I'm not going to engage in semantics about that. What is Ethiopia's claim to port? No, everybody needs a port. No country, no country wants to be landlocked. But it is not an inherent right. It's not a natural right that you have a port. because some countries are in the interior of the continent and they don't have any access to that port. But there is international law, how you actually legally obtain, and that one, Alamayo could speak more into that. There is international law, how you could actually find access to the sea and do business with the rest of the world. There are ways of legally and legitimately obtaining access to the sea. A port is not, and this is the problem with my fellow Ethiopians, that it's not an entitlement. You're not entitled to. You can find legal ways, but it's not an entitlement. Some countries are landlocked, and they have remained landlocked. It's probably the unfairness of nature. What we can say here in Ethiopia, that Ethiopia had access to her own ports. Remember, in the last 500 years, and I'm not going to Adonis or Aksumite Empire because it's not necessary. But in the last 500 years, Ethiopia had its own port only in the 40 years between 1952 and 1991. Before that, for the remaining 300 years, there was no claim. The quote that Mr. Abiy had of Alula Banaga, that we had an historical claim to the port, well, it was, in the first place, he said it in a historical context, by the way, during the scramble for Africa. Alula Banaga uttered those words in the context of the scramble for Africa. That's when he said those words. Are we back in the scramble for Africa? Maybe yes. Maybe yes, from the Arab Gulf states. But to pin your claim on what Alula Badaga said, if Ethiopia has a claim, a legitimate claim, to pin it on the words uttered by Alula Badaga in the context of the scramble for Africa during the imperial colonial ventures of Europe, if that is the case, then that's a big problem for the Ethiopian government to make a case. And remember, Alula Banaga is, the government of Ethiopia was against the children of Alula Banaga for 2 years, slaughtering them and destroying their belongings and conducting genocide against the children of Alula Banaga. Okay. So what is the historical claim that Ethiopia has? If you are entitled, if this is a matter of entitlement, what is the historical claim? 40 to 560 years, it's no comparison. Now, if there is an economic argument, the economic argument is that Ethiopia's population is growing, its economy is supposedly growing, so we're going to have a volume, a larger volume, or an increasing volume of trade, of exports and imports, and we're going to need more ports than one. So that is the economic claim. So if this is an economic claim that could hold to up to scrutiny, you're paying about 1.5 billion to 2 billion to Djibouti. Now, if you have your own port, there is no cost, it's free. There is no cost to running a port. There is no spending on energy and security and all that. Is that free when you have your own port? How does that make an economic sense? Number two, you pay $2 billion to Djibouti. And if you pull to Djibouti, there are many Ethiopians who are earning their livelihood or their living in Djibouti who are remitting that money back to Ethiopia. And most of the Djiboutians, they rely on Ethiopian agricultural products. And they buy tomatoes and chats and all kinds of agricultural products from Ethiopia, benefiting Ethiopian farmers. So if you're not paying the Djibouti workers in Djibouti, Ethiopians and Djiboutians, all you are doing is damaging your own farmers on the highlands of Hararghe. How does that make an economic sense for Ethiopians who are arguing about we need a port because otherwise we will die? Well, Ethiopia had a port, like I said, for 40 years, but it lived without a port. But having an access to Djibouti, to Berbera, to Mogadishu, to Mombasa, and your prime minister himself went as far as Lamu, standing together with Uhuru Kenyatta declared that Lamu is going to be the biggest access for southern Ethiopia. Lamu is still there. The Ethiopian government has a plan to build a 6-lane highway to connect it to Isiolo and Isiolo to Lamu. That's the plan. Well, let me tell one more thing. Ethiopia and China and others have invested in the port of Assab, and Ethiopia has borrowed about $5 billion to build roads, and electrified railway to Djibouti. You have already invested that much on it. If you are going to have your own port somewhere on a leased land in Somaliland, you're going to have to spend about $30 billion, $40 billion to get it from scratch. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. And the idea that Ethiopia is really having an existential crisis if it doesn't have access to the port is bogus. At best, it's really bogus. At worst, it is a lie. Ethiopia had, even after Eritrea was declared independent, as a result of an outcome of a 30-year war that the Eritreans fought and the Ethiopian government lost, even after that, Ethiopia had an expanding economy. For the first time in its own history, an expanding economy with Djibouti Airport and Barbara Airport and other ports. So there is really no basis for this idea that Ethiopia needs support. You're not entitled to it. You can get it through observing international law, not by violating bedrock principles of international relations, such as respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of a country. You don't have to flaunt that to get your own port in 21st century. The world is against us. Of course, the world is against you. It will be against you on this one. It's been demonstrated. This is not hypotheticals. Mr. Redwan Hussein is not going to finesse it. We have seen it. We have observed it with our own eyes. The entire world is against you because you went against a bedrock principle of international relations that actually guarantees that a state or a country exists. You went against that because you were childish. It's your infantile diplomacy. It's your infantile analysis of everything else based on even economic argument. There is no legitimate argument here. There is no economic argument. There is no historical argument. And there is no security argument for that sake. So we are in the 21st century. We're not really in the medieval period where Ethiopia was trying to get access to the sea. That's not where we are. We play by the rules of the game. You violated bedrock principles as Ethiopians if you're supporting this government. And I'll say toward the end, if we are talking about the impact and the consequence of what was done, but there is really no basis for simply the entitlement that you have to get a port. The idea about an existential issue for Ethiopia is a lie, a bogus lie. And the idea that the world is against that, but we overcame, well, you didn't overcome even that. In the first instance, also, you did not overcome. You were rendered a pariah state. And it is the addition that you actually exported the issue to the regional area that the world is against you. Do more, and the entire world is going to be against you.
Okay, thank you, Still. Maybe when I come back to the final thoughts, you will reflect on the possibility of war either with Asmara or Mogadishu, because the Prime Minister of Somalia was today
dadka Soomaaliyeed
speaking,
ee waqooyiga Soomaaliya degan
about what is
Somaliland
happening and so on vis-a-vis Ethiopia and Somaliland. So maybe Alex, just briefly, because we are over the hour now, what's your take in terms of what might happen? Will Addis Ababa or Arakilo go back and maybe reconsider everything, or do you see like what was happening domestically in terms of going by force, either to Asmara or to Mogadishu or wherever this might happen? Alamaya.
Thank you, Getachew. Actually, what's lacking in that part of the region, more particularly in Ethiopia, sanity is in short supply. Rationality is in short supply. So I don't know what they will do. All right. I mean, the rational thing to do is to roll it back, but I am not sure if they would do that. But let me say just a few words to answer your question about its ramifications, because I didn't get the chance to say anything about it. So my critique of the signing of the MOU has two prongs. The first is with respect to Ethiopia's foreign policy. So it has to do with the region. Somalia, as we saw, is visibly upset. It's seeking support from Egypt and Eritrea, potentially fostering an anti-Ethiopian sentiment across the region. Djibouti too is irked, anticipating losses and unfolding of December's efforts to facilitate talks between Somaliland and Somalia. Given the UAE's influence, this move might align with their strategy to establish a pro-Hamiti. This has also a Sudan implication, which is very important to take into account, involving Chad, Ethiopia, Somaliland, and possibly Kenya. Concurrently, the SAF alliance with Egypt, Eritrea, and Saudi Arabia, raising implications for Sudan. China, a key player, may appease any recognition of Somaliland, may oppose, not appease, especially given its relations with Taiwan. As you know, it's Somaliland that has itself a de facto state that has tried to get a recognition from another de facto state, which is Taiwan. If the naval base in Somaliland materializes, providing Ethiopia with strategic access, effective policing and control will depend on enhanced regional utility and cooperation. Egyptian Foreign Ministry, so we have witnessed shuttle diplomacies over the past 2 weeks between Asmara, Egypt. So the foreign minister of Egypt has traveled to Asmara. He took a message from President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki, and they discussed on the regional developments. What
To
took place
Mogadishu as
between
well.
Ethiopia and Somaliland. Yeah. The president of Somalia has also an open invitation to travel to Cairo that we haven't witnessed yet. The second prong of my critique has to do with Ethiopia's domestic national policy. There is this age-old saying, proverb in English: people who live in glass houses don't throw stones. Ethiopia itself is ridden with secessionist movements. I'm not taking any position here. I'm not saying I'm not saying I'm not trying to condemn or approve any position here. But what I'm saying is, if I were a statesman, this is something I would consider last. This wouldn't be my first agenda. So until the peace agreement, as we know what was going on with the ONLF. All right. I was a critic of Ethiopia's involvement in Somalia in December 2006. My publications are out there for people who want to see. That Ethiopia's involvement in Somalia was fueling the tension, the conflicts in Ethiopia, within Ethiopian and Somali people. Other conflicts between the Ethiopian Somali and the Oromo people on that border, on that part of Ethiopia. And as we know what's going on in the Amhara region, we know what's going on in the Amhara region. We know the sentiments in Tigray region during the war, all right? The secessionist sentiments. Nobody wanted to be part of Ethiopia during the war, okay? The rekindling of Somali irredentism coupled with resurgent Amhara revanchism supported by Eritrea is adding more heat to the already raging fire in the region, all right? So I want to say that.
Great, thank you. Faisal, final thought?
Yeah, I think Ethiopia is in a bad situation with Abiy's leadership, somebody who has such a deep-rooted racist, attitude. Not that he knows he is. For instance, that article I shared with you, he said, "Why would Gurages want to stay? They can go as far as Mogadishu and make money." That's a typical stereotype of what we would say about Gurage. He also, called Black American, his name is like people who are lazy, who don't work. And then he went on and said the Jews are the ones who control. So this is, at the international level, this guy is ignorant. At the local level, we see what we have said. Let me just touch a couple of things and then stop. I think, as Alamayo said, Ethiopia is in a glass herself, and maybe Abiy forgot, that his country is in a glass. And I've been writing about this issue quite a lot, that Ethiopia is not ready to even make the gesture that Somalia can make. Somalia is a post-colonial state. So there are edges where you can move things and work. Democratization on the edge is possible. If they get peace, Somalia can easily thrive in the private sector of the economy as well as some sort of democratic system. Ethiopia is an old feudal imperial state, the last imperial state probably in the world. So it has a lot of things to do. There are things that make Ethiopia or create limitations for Ethiopia to understand some of the issues that we are talking about. For instance, I think Eskiel expressed it very well, that any nation can work with the geographic inheritance that it has. You can double, your efforts through market economy, through other things, but you are always, limited by what you have. I think because of the culture of imperialism embedded in the state structure of Ethiopia, there is always this grandiose Pax Ethiopiana that somehow makes its way into the Aret Kilo. So people like Abiy come and they think they can go as far as, Zanzibar, to be, by reading the books that Menelik left. So what we want is, we don't want to rehash the old, imperial culture that Ethiopia had, but work across the board. Amara progressivists, Tigray progressivists, Oromo progressivists, and find a solution where you don't have a leader in Ethiopia who thinks in the grandiose way. Otherwise, at the end of the day, I think Ethiopia is more in a glass house than Somalia is. I think Somalia has always the ability to fund and somehow push those groups who have had historical grievances against the Ethiopian state. And at the end of the day, that may hurt Ethiopia. So I think Somalia is open. I know the inside works of Somalia. Somalia is open for regional integration, collaboration. It has been working with the World Bank for several inter-regional connections and connectivity between Somalia and Ethiopia. We just need somebody to come to Aret Kilo who understands both the regional as well as the global dynamics that we need, so that people can work and save themselves from the ramifications that are very possible. I think, if anything, this MOU is just a window dressing for land grab and invasion and annexation of a sovereign state's land, and that's not acceptable.
Eskiel, final thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to say about the possibilities of war. That's in the realm of speculation. But I can speak to the ramifications of what has unfolded and what might unfold. I think that the consequences of this irresponsible act, done basically for political reasons within the country. Remember, Mr. Abiy Ahmed didn't make this claim of the MOU when he spoke about it, did not say about economics or growing or 150 million people or growing to become a second powerful country in the world. He said once he had signed the MOU, the point that he made was that he had healed Ethiopia's brokenness. What that simply means is that Ethiopia was broken because of the deal of bandits, as he called it in the past, the bandits being the TPLF and the EPLF. The deal of the bandits is what denied Ethiopia access to the sea. For him, for the president of Prosperity Party, even today, the issue is not about the historical claim that Ethiopia had, the port that the country deserves because of its demographic and economic size. Those were thrown over the board. His is dealing with domestic issue. He's still trying to correct the wrong that TPLF had done and EPLF had done. His struggle is with the intangible forces that are in his head. Even the MOU, this MOU is not about the acquisition of port. It's not about access to the sea. Ethiopia had access to the sea all along. It's not that Ethiopia deserves because of prestige. It's not about security. It's not about all of that. It's still the point that he made. Listen to it. The point that he made is Ethiopia's brokenness was healed. Ethiopia was restored. It was a matter of fighting a war that the country lost 30 years ago. But what is the consequence of it? Well, we know about Ethiopia, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. But it has done a couple of things to Somaliland itself and to Somalia and to the region. To Somaliland, we know that the Somaliland had been doing everything to try to gain legitimacy and recognition and take her place among this community, the nations of the world. It had done a lot to form a functional democratic state, a constitutional rule, all that, until Musa Bihi took over. That is damaged now. The quest for the democratization within Somalia itself has been damaged because Musa Bihi was not quite the agent of democratization that the Somalis were Somalis were seeking all along. He is someone who actually had extended his term in office, just like Abiy did. And now he's trying to use the MOU or the leverage as a leverage to prop up himself. We didn't go into all of this, but that effort by the Somaliland people, because of the push from Ethiopia, has been derailed. The democratization itself has been derailed, and that's an impact on the quest for recognition. I think the Somaliland government has also lost the momentum for recognition. It has already lost some of the momentum because of the war that he conducted against the SSC, the Sol Sanag and Ain state. He'd already lost half of the Somaliland territory because the political forces in that state are now working for recognition and union with Somalia. So Somaliland itself has already lost about half of its land size for which it claims sovereignty. Out of the state where the lease was made, there is a lot of protests and there is a lot of crackdown there, which is showing that this man is not for free speech, this man is not for dissent, he's for authoritarian rule. So these two issues reinforce each other. There's a quest for democratization, which could have reinforced the quest for recognition, is weaker today than it was 14 days ago. That has been the impact of it. Second, the relationship with Somalia. A lot of people in Somalia were born after the Siad Barre government, or where Somalia was really perceived as a problem child of Africa, an irredentist country, and spoiling everything for Africa and for the Horn of Africans. Remember, the tent was defeated. The tent died, Brzezinski said, in the war between Ethiopia and Somalia. The next generation, the generation that grew up after the government of Somalia had collapsed, they were looking at Ethiopia as a positive issue, not an enemy to be reckoned with, but as a possible ally going into the future. That has been completely damaged. The work that had been done was already completely damaged, and within Somalia, Ethiopia is seen as enemy. Even within Ethiopia, some people who could pay attention to what happened now see Somalia is always the problem child, that Somalia is always standing in the way of Ethiopia's greatness. That's the perception that had developed. But most importantly, the possibility of coexistence, the possibility of mutual respect between two peoples was damaged as a result of this MOU. And this has endangered the Ethiopians in Somalia. Remember, Somalia had always been a refuge for persecuted people from Ethiopia, from the eastern part of the country. Tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands had made home in Somalia. That had been endangered as a result of it. So, because the opposition, look at the opposition against the deal, even in Somalia. even in Somalia, alleging that Musa Bihi did not consult with them and inform his own ministers that he did this with Abiy, just like Abiy did. On the Ethiopian side, only Abiy and Redwan Hussein knew about the deal. Ahmed Shide, the finance minister, who's a Somali member, did not know. The second party in the party, Adam Farah, did not know. Nobody knew. Nobody knew. The foreign minister did not know. The same is happening on the Somali side. It's really Ethiopia is ingratiating itself on the Somali, and so the damage is greater. Let me say this and stop. The geopolitics in the region had been disturbed, and there is a flashpoint in this geopolitics. And I'll say this elsewhere, but I will make it short. And Alamayo had already alluded to it, to the emergence of alliances. This alliance extends, so first one, actually, alliance between governments who are concerned about security in the Red Sea region. Egypt, Sudan, what left of Sudan, Eritrea, Saudi Arabia, and Somalia is one arc. Possibly Turkey is joining that league. On the other hand, there is the alliance of the renegades, the UAE, the Somaliland, and Ethiopia, and Hemeti's Sudan. The alliance of governments and the alliance of renegades is now intersecting on this issue in the Red Sea era. That is the flashpoint. That's the point of intersection between the renegades and the government. So the damage is, the ramification is far-flung than we even thought at the beginning.
One viewer made this point. It's just a memorandum of understanding, but leading to all these kinds of ramifications. I will give the final word to Alex, but I think Faisal, you want to say something as well. So let me give the mic to Alex, and you will come back, Faisal. Alex, final word.
Okay, so one last thing I wanted to say is about the way Ethiopia handled. I mean, I want to say two things. If the international community or the community of nations really want to recognize Somaliland, they should really be the first to do that, not Ethiopia. The second thing, if Ethiopia has to do, it's the first axiom of international relations to pursue your national interest. If Ethiopia wants to pursue its national interest of using Somaliland, of having this economic transaction, of getting a concession over Berbera for a period of time, including the naval base, if it really has a name, then I don't think it should do it the way it did. That was very reckless. It was an international relations misadventure you wouldn't think of. So I would advise caution. I would advise respecting the African Union's age-old principle, the United Nations principle of non-intervention in respecting the sovereignty of neighboring nations. I mean, if Ethiopia really wants to get access to the sea, the only way it can get access to the sea is by cooperation. Even this MOU, you just can't just sign MOUs and expect to get access to the sea. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Faisal?
No, I think finally we came, I think access is not an issue because with international law, Ethiopia could always get access. Even use of port comes through contracts and agreements. It had the longest contract with Djibouti, where at times the Ethiopian economy grew to the tune of 10% during the EPRDF. So that's not really an issue. It's just a crisis of politics within the Ethiopian body politic. I think Scale touched also internal mechanism with Somaliland. I tried not to, but yes, of the four major clans in Somaliland, Isa, Gedibursi, Isa, and Darod, Isaq is the only part where Musa Bihi now has jurisdiction, and even within that, they have divided into two: the Eastern Isaq and the Western Isaq. And the Eastern Isaq are out. Who is Ethiopia dealing with in this, impending, looming conflict, which is, she may even need some alliances within the Somali population? It doesn't have that. So I think all of us made the point that cooperation and integration is needed. I think Ethiopia and Somalia in the long haul should work together. But two things that are important. I think Abiy and his team are deliberately making, creating conflict between the brotherly, sisterly Somali and Oromo community. There is over 1 million Oromos living inside Somalia. And with war and conflict taking place, those people have no person to protect. And I think there is a vested interest in Addis Ababa to ensure that Somalis and Oromos don't work together. And those of us who are on the outside, we recognize that, and we think there is a sinister, in that issue. And then the last one, Somalia was fragile, more fragile today than in the past. In 1994, the late Muhammad Haji Ibrahim Igal came to Mala Zinawi and asked for unification, according to Kande Afrik, that used to be printed in Ethiopia at the time. Mala Zinawi, to his credit, said, we love to have unification with Somalia, but only after you sort out your problems and you become one, then we can all come together. That's what a visionary leader would do. You don't take advantage of a small crisis in your backyard. You fashion public policy and then augment that public policy to be, helpful to everyone and each other. And I think that is what Ethiopians today are seeing. Despite all the problems Somalis had with mullahs in 2006, despite the fact that many Ethiopians had issues with mullahs, today when they compare in posthumously between Abiy and mullahs, they see a schoolboy and an international world-class leader. That's the difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal, Scale, and Alamayo for today's insightful discussion. I know many people missed the H panel and we were on a break. We'll continue, and this discussion will continue as well. There were many people who were asking whether this was in Amharic or in English from Somalia as well. So you saw it, it's in English every week on Sundays at 7 p.m. In the meantime, there is a famine going on in Tigray, and because of the genocidal war and what happened after it, there are a number of suffering children and the elderly. And we'll be speaking to a group who is trying to help a hospital in Adwa tomorrow in Tigrinya. Follow us. Askel, Alex, and Faisal, good night from here. Thank you and see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Okay, that was the show for today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. And we'll see you in yet another show, another episode of the H panel on Sunday next week at 7 p.m. Good night.